The champagne glass slipped from my trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor of the Blackwood mansion. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me, their gazes sharp with judgment and thinly veiled amusement. My cousin Marcus chuckled, shaking his head as he adjusted his Armani cufflinks. "Still clumsy as ever, Elena. Some things never change, do they?" Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But it wasn't clumsiness that made me drop that glass. It was the voice that had just cut through the elegant dinner party chatter like a blade through silk. A voice I hadn't heard in 8 years, calling a name I thought was buried forever. General Thompson? Is that really you? The evening had started innocently enough. My grandmother's 80th birthday celebration at the family estate in Connecticut, a sprawling monument to old money and older secrets. I'd driven up from my small apartment in Hartford, wearing the one decent dress I owned and practicing my smile in the rearview mirror. 8 years of exile from the family fold, 8 years of being the black sheep, the disappointment, the one who threw away her potential to play soldier. The Blackwoods had always been titans of industry, senators and CEOs, their portraits lining the grand staircase like a gallery of American aristocracy. And then there was me, Elena Blackwood, who had the audacity to enlist in the Army straight out of Yale, breaking 3 generations of family tradition. My decision had caused what my mother diplomatically called a significant family disagreement, which in Blackwood terms meant complete ostracism. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, cream-colored cardstock with gold embossing, my name written in my grandmother's precise handwriting. No phone call, no personal note, just the formal summons that I was expected to attend. After 8 years of silence, I should have thrown it in the trash. Instead, I found myself standing in their foyer, surrounded by the ghosts of my privileged past. "Elena, darling, you look so healthy," my Aunt Patricia observed, air-kissing both my cheeks while her eyes cataloged every detail of my off-the-rack dress. "Military life certainly gave you some muscle tone." My grandmother, Evelyn Blackwood, held court from her velvet throne in the drawing room, accepting tribute from family members and society friends who'd gathered to celebrate her 8 decades of wielding power like a scalpel. When she saw me, her steel-gray eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Elena, I wondered if you'd actually come." Her voice carried the same authority that had made senators stumble over their words and CEOs reconsider their decisions. "I trust you finally come to your senses about that military phase of yours." Phase. As if my 12 years of service, my 3 combat deployments, my classified missions that I couldn't even hint at were nothing more than a rebellious teenager's experiment. I forced my practiced smile to widen. "It's good to see you too, grandmother." The dinner itself was a masterpiece of passive aggression disguised as family bonding. 40 guests seated at a table that could have doubled as a runway, crystal glasses catching the light from the Austrian chandelier, conversation flowing like expensive wine between topics deemed appropriate for polite society. Art acquisitions, charity galas, political connections, business mergers. Nothing real, nothing raw, nothing that might disturb the carefully curated perfection. I found myself seated between my cousin Derek, a hedge fund prince who spoke exclusively in quarterly projections, and Mrs. Carmichael, an ancient society matron whose idea of current events stopped somewhere around the Reagan administration. Across from me sat Marcus, my grandmother's golden boy, the one who'd followed the family playbook to perfection. Harvard Law, partnership at grandmother's law firm by 30, marriage to a senator's daughter, 2 perfectly behaved children who would undoubtedly continue the legacy. "So, Elena," Marcus said, cutting into his perfectly prepared duck with surgical precision, "Mother mentioned you're working at some kind of security company now. Private sector finally lured you away from government work?" The table quieted slightly, the way conversations do when someone accidentally brings up the embarrassing relative's failed career. I set down my fork, meeting his gaze with the composure I'd learned in briefing rooms where lives hung in the balance. "Something like that." Derek leaned in, wine loosening his tongue. "Must be quite an adjustment, going from taking orders to actually having to make money. I mean, what does military experience even translate to in the real world?" Laughter rippled around the table, polite but cutting. My Uncle Charles raised his glass with mock solemnly. Well, at least she learned discipline. That's something. Oh, Charles, my mother chimed in from across the table, her voice dripping with practiced disappointment. Elena always was too headstrong for her own good. We all hoped the military would cure her of that stubborn streak, but it seems to have made it worse. Mrs. Carmichael patted my hand with condescending sympathy. Dear, surely it's time to put all that unpleasantness behind you and settle down properly. A girl from your background, with the right connections, could still make an advantageous marriage. My nephew Richard just divorced his second wife, very wealthy, very connected. The conversation continued to flow around me, each comment a small cut designed to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy. The disappointment, the one who'd wasted her advantages, the cautionary tale of what happens when you stray from the prescribed path. My cousin Jennifer, Marcus's wife, leaned forward with false concern. I have to ask, Elena, wasn't it terribly difficult being away from civilization for so long? All those dangerous places, all that violence. It must have been so traumatic for someone with your upbringing. I took a sip of wine, buying myself a moment to choose my words carefully. It was challenging. I imagine it was, my Uncle Robert interjected. All that time wasted when you could have been building something meaningful. Look at Marcus here, already being considered for partner at 3 different firms. That's what real achievement looks like. Marcus preened under the praise, straightening his tie with false modesty. The military has its place, of course, but in today's economy, you need practical skills, strategy that actually matters, not playing war games in some desert. The words hit their target. I felt my jaw tighten, my hands clench in my lap. 8 years of this. 8 years of being treated like I'd spent my 20s and 30s playing dress-up instead of serving my country in ways they couldn't begin to imagine. Playing war games, I repeated, my voice carefully neutral. Well, you know what I mean, Marcus continued, emboldened by the approving murmurs around the table. Real leadership happens in boardrooms, not bunkers. Moving millions of dollars, making decisions that affect thousands of jobs. That's true responsibility. Derek nodded sagely. Exactly. What's the biggest decision you ever made in the military? Which route to take on patrol? The laughter was sharper now, less polite. I could see my grandmother watching me with those calculating eyes, waiting to see if I'd finally learned my lesson, if I'd been properly humbled by their casual cruelty. My mother sighed dramatically. I just wish Elena would finally accept that her little adventure is over. It's time to come home, metaphorically speaking. Use the family connections she spent so long ignoring. We could find her something suitable. Administrative work, perhaps. Something that doesn't require too much.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Independence. That word landed like a slap. Independence. The quality that had driven me to enlist, to excel, to serve in places and ways that would give these people nightmares. Reduced to a character flaw that needed correction? Jennifer tilted her head with mock sympathy. It must be so hard, starting over at your age. Most people have established careers by now, built something meaningful. But it's never too late to learn, I suppose. The private security thing could work, Uncle Charles offered magnanimously. Lots of ex-military end up as bodyguards for people like us. Good, honest work. Not glamorous, but steady. Bodyguards. For people like them. I felt something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. A familiar feeling from moments when everything hung in the balance, and there was only one way forward. Of course, there's always the VA, Derek added with a smirk. I hear they have programs for veterans who have trouble adjusting to civilian life, therapy, job training, that sort of thing. The table erupted in knowing chuckles. Even my grandmother's lips curved in what might have been amusement. I was their entertainment for the evening, the cautionary tale they could dissect over their $500 bottles of wine. Mrs. Carmichael squeezed my hand again. Don't feel bad, dear. Not everyone is cut out for the pressures of real responsibility. The military must have been comforting in its own way. having everything decided for you, no real choices to make. Marcus leaned back in his chair, wine and audience approval making him bold. I have to admit, I never understood the appeal. Following orders, living in barracks, eating cafeteria food. It sounds like an expensive boarding school for adults who can't handle freedom. Marcus, Jennifer said with mock concern, don't be mean. Elena did her best with the cards she was dealt. Not everyone can handle the pressure of actual leadership. The conversation moved on, as it always did in my family, to more important matters: stock portfolios and vacation homes, political donations, and social connections. I sat in my designated role as the object lesson, the reminder of what happens when you reject everything the Blackwoods stood for. But I wasn't really listening anymore. My mind had traveled back 8 years, to a different kind of dinner in a very different place. A mess tent in Afghanistan, sharing MREs with soldiers who trusted me with their lives. The weight of classified briefings, the responsibility of decisions that affected national security. The quiet pride of serving something larger than myself, even when it meant being disowned by everything I'd once called home. My grandmother tapped her crystal glass with a silver spoon, calling for attention. The room fell silent as she rose with the dignity of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. "My dear family and friends," she began, her voice carrying easily through the dining room. "As I celebrate 80 years of life, I'm reminded of what truly matters: family, legacy, the courage to uphold the values that built this great nation." Her eyes found mine across the table, and I saw the challenge there, the final test. "Some of us," she continued, "understand the weight of responsibility that comes with privilege, the obligation to use our advantages wisely, to build something lasting, to contribute meaningfully to society." The praise washed over Marcus and Derek, over the successful cousins and accomplished family friends. I remained conspicuously excluded from her benediction. Others, her voice sharpened slightly, take longer to learn these lessons, but it's never too late to choose the right path, to embrace the opportunities that come with being part of something greater than oneself. She raised her glass, and 40 others followed suit, to family, to legacy, to understanding where we truly belong. The toast echoed around the table, warm and inclusive for everyone except me. I raised my glass mechanically, playing my part in their theater of conditional love. That's when the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the post-toast conversation like an unexpected note in a familiar symphony. Our host, Uncle Charles, frowned with mild annoyance. Who could that be at this hour? The butler, Stevens, appeared in the doorway with the discretion that had served the family for 3 decades. "Sir, there's a gentleman at the door. He says it's urgent government business." My grandmother's expression sharpened. The Blackwoods had government connections stretching back generations, but those connections didn't typically appear unannounced at dinner parties. "What kind of government business?" Charles asked. "He didn't specify, sir. He's asking to speak with someone named General Thompson. He seems quite insistent." The name hit the room like a physical force. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Every eye in the room began scanning faces, looking for recognition, for explanation. General Thompson. My throat went dry. My heart began hammering against my ribs with the force of a military drum corps. That name, that title, belonged to a life I'd thought was safely buried, an identity so classified that even I sometimes wondered if it had been real. But here, in my grandmother's dining room, surrounded by the people who'd spent the evening mocking my military service as an expensive mistake, that name hung in the air like a ghost demanding recognition. Marcus looked puzzled. "Thompson? Do we know any General Thompson?" "Perhaps he has the wrong address," Jennifer suggested. "These government types aren't always the brightest." My grandmother's eyes were sharp as a hawk's, scanning the room methodically. "Stevens, did he show any identification?" "Yes, ma'am. Presidential staff credentials. He seemed quite certain about the name." Presidential staff. The words sent ice through my veins and fire through my spine simultaneously. Only a handful of people in the world knew that General Thompson and Elena Blackwood were the same person. That knowledge was classified at levels that made state secrets look like grocery lists, which meant someone very high up the food chain needed Elena Blackwood to remember she was General Thompson, and they needed it badly enough to track me down at my family's dinner party. Uncle Charles stood, irritation creasing his features. Well, this is highly irregular. I suppose I should speak with him, clear up this confusion. No. The word came out of my mouth before I could stop it, sharp and commanding. Every head turned toward me, surprise replacing confusion in their faces. I stood slowly, my body moving with the precision that years of military bearing had etched into my bones. For the first time all evening, I felt like myself instead of the disappointing relative they'd spent hours dissecting. I'll handle this. My mother blinked in confusion. Elena, dear, you can't possibly know what this is about. But my grandmother was watching me with new intensity, her politician's instincts sensing something shifting in the room's dynamics. Elena? I met her gaze steadily, and for the first time in 8 years, I saw uncertainty flicker in those steel-gray eyes. I'll be right back. The walk from the dining room to the front door felt like crossing a bridge between two different worlds. Behind me, the murmur of confused conversation filled the space I'd left. Ahead, through the heavy oak door, waited a reality I'd thought was permanently sealed away. Stevens opened the door to reveal a young man in an impeccable black suit, his bearing military straight despite the civilian clothes. He had the look of someone who'd seen enough classified briefings to develop permanent worry lines, but his eyes lit with relief when he saw me. General Thompson, he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of urgent necessity. Sir, we have a situation. Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of 40 chairs scraping against marble as my family rose to their feet in unison. The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear my grandmother's antique clock ticking in the hallway. I turned to see them frozen in the dining room doorway, their faces a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning realization. Marcus's mouth hung open like a landed fish. Derek's wineglass tilted dangerously in his slack grip. My mother pressed one hand to her chest as if checking that her heart was still beating. But it was my grandmother's face that held my attention. The woman who had built an empire on reading people, on knowing exactly who held power and how to wield it, was staring at me as if I'd materialized from thin air. The presidential aide stepped closer, lowering his voice to a level that wouldn't carry. Ma'am, I apologize for the interruption, but we have a code black situation developing. The president needs your immediate consultation. Code black. The classification that meant national security hung in the balance, that meant every minute of delay could cost lives. I felt the familiar shift in my mind, the transition from Elena Blackwood, family disappointment, to General Thompson, strategic asset of the United States government. How immediate? I asked. Marine 1 is waiting at Bradley Field. The president is requesting your personal briefing within the hour. Marine 1, the president's helicopter, waiting for me. I glanced back at my family, still frozen in their tableau of shock. 8 years of their certainty that I'd wasted my life, thrown away my potential, chosen the wrong path. 8 years of being treated like a cautionary tale instead of a human being. The irony was so perfect it was almost funny. General, the aide prompted gently, your response. I straightened, feeling the weight of responsibility settle across my shoulders like a familiar uniform. Tell the president I'll be there in 20 minutes. The aide nodded crisply, spoke briefly into a concealed microphone, and stepped back to wait by his government sedan. I turned to face my family, 40 pairs of eyes staring at me as if I'd suddenly grown wings and started speaking in tongues. The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Finally, Marcus found his voice. General Thompson? My grandmother stepped forward, her politician's composure cracking for the first time in my memory. Elena, what exactly is going on here? I looked around the room, taking in their faces one by one. The cousins who'd mocked my career choices, The aunts and uncles who'd written me off as a failure. The mother who'd spent the evening apologizing for my existence. "I have to go," I said simply. "Duty calls." "But you can't just leave," Jennifer protested. "We don't understand what's happening." Uncle Charles stepped forward, his lawyer instincts engaging. "Elena, if you're involved in some kind of government situation, the family should know. We have connections, resources, we can help." Help? The word almost made me laugh. After 8 years of exile, 8 years of being told I'd chosen poorly, suddenly they wanted to help? "Thank you," I said, my voice carrying the polite distance of a diplomat addressing foreign nationals. "But this is beyond civilian consultation." My mother reached toward me, her face pale with confusion. "Elena, sweetheart, I don't understand. You can't be." "A general?" I finished gently. "I've been promoted twice since leaving active duty, Mother. Retired generals can be recalled for special situations." The words hit the room like artillery shells. Retired general? Special situations? Presidential consultation? My cousin Derek, who had spent the evening explaining how military experience didn't translate to real-world skills, looked like he might be physically ill. Mrs. Carmichael, who had patted my hand and suggested I needed therapy to adjust to civilian life, was staring at me as if I'd revealed myself to be a foreign species. My grandmother, the woman who had built her power on knowing everyone worth knowing, was facing the reality that she had systematically excluded someone who apparently mattered to the President of the United States. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long what?" "How long have you—" she gestured vaguely, unable to form the words. "General Thompson," I supplied. 8 years, since shortly after I left home. 8 years. The exact length of my exile from the family, the exact period during which they'd been treating me like a failed experiment, while I was apparently important enough to warrant presidential consultation. "How long?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How long what?" "How long have you—" she gestured vaguely, unable to form the words. "General Thompson," I supplied. 8 years, since shortly after I left home. 8 years. The exact length of my exile from the family, the exact period during which they'd been treating me like a failed experiment while I was apparently important enough to warrant presidential consultation. Marcus sank into a nearby chair, his face the color of old parchment. "But you said you worked for a private security company." "I do, among other things." I checked my watch, a habit from briefings where every second mattered. "And right now, I'm needed elsewhere." I started toward the door, then paused and turned back. My grandmother had tears in her eyes, something I'd never seen in 35 years of knowing her. "Grandmother," I said softly, "thank you for the invitation. It's been illuminating." The presidential aide opened the car door as I approached, his professional demeanor never wavering despite the family drama he'd just witnessed. "Ma'am, if I may," he said quietly as I settled into the leather seat, "the president sends his apologies for interrupting your family gathering." I looked back at the mansion, where 40 silhouettes stood frozen in the lit windows, like figures in a museum diorama. "Actually," I said, "the timing couldn't have been more perfect." As we pulled away from the circular drive, my phone began buzzing with frantic calls and text messages, but I ignored them all. For the first time in 8 years, I had somewhere more important to be than explaining myself to the Blackwoods. The helicopter ride to Washington gave me time to shift mental gears, to transform from Elena, the disappointing granddaughter, back into General Thompson, strategic advisor to the most powerful person on Earth. The transition felt like shedding an old skin, revealing something truer underneath. But as the lights of the Capitol appeared below us, I found myself thinking about the faces I'd left behind in that dining room, the shock, the confusion, the dawning realization that they had fundamentally misunderstood who I was and what I'd been doing for the past 8 years. The private security company was real, of course. What I hadn't mentioned was that it was a consulting firm for situations too sensitive for official military involvement, staffed by a very select group of retired personnel with specialized clearances. We advised on everything from hostage negotiations to counter-terrorism strategy, all under contracts so classified that even the paperwork was classified. And at the center of it all was General Thompson, the identity I'd cultivated for situations requiring someone who officially didn't exist, but unofficially commanded resources that could reshape geopolitical landscapes. My family had spent the evening mocking my career as playing war games in the desert. They had no idea that some of those games had prevented actual wars, that some of those desert operations had kept their comfortable world spinning safely on its axis. But now they knew I was General Thompson, even if they didn't understand what that meant. And tomorrow, when they started making calls and pulling strings to find out exactly who their black sheep granddaughter had become, they were going to discover that all their connections, all their influence, couldn't get them answers to questions classified above their pay grade. The helicopter touched down on the White House lawn just as my watch showed exactly 1 hour since the aide had appeared at the dinner. Military precision, even in crisis. As I walked across the South Lawn, I felt the last traces of Elena Blackwood, disappointing granddaughter, fall away like shed armor. General Thompson had work to do. But part of me couldn't stop thinking about the look in my grandmother's eyes when she realized that the failure she'd been mourning for 8 years had actually been succeeding beyond her wildest dreams in a world she couldn't even access. The family dinner was over. The real evening was just beginning. The White House Situation Room hummed with controlled urgency at 3 a.m. Banks of monitors displayed satellite feeds, intelligence reports, and real-time communications from crisis points around the globe. I'd been in this room dozens of times over the past 8 years, but never under circumstances quite like these. President Martinez looked up as I entered, his usually immaculate appearance showing the strain of 18 hours in crisis management mode. His tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up, and the lines around his eyes seemed deeper than when I'd last briefed him 6 months ago about the Syrian situation. General Thompson, thank you for coming so quickly. He gestured to the chair across from him at the polished conference table. I apologize for pulling you away from your family gathering, but we have a situation that requires your particular expertise. I settled into the familiar rhythm of high-level briefings, my mind shifting fully into operational mode. What's the nature of the crisis, sir? Secretary of Defense Patricia Hawks leaned forward, her tablet displaying a map of Eastern Europe. At 1400 hours local time, an American diplomatic convoy was ambushed outside Bucharest. Ambassador Williams and her security detail are missing, presumed captured by a group calling itself the New Iron Guard. The name sent a chill through my spine. I'd been tracking fragments of intelligence about this organization for 2 years, a neo-fascist movement with connections to both Russian intelligence and domestic terrorist cells across Europe. They'd been building towards something, but we'd never pinned down exactly what. Demands? I asked. CIA Director Reynolds slid a translated document across the table. They want the release of 12 political prisoners from Romanian jails, 50 million in cryptocurrency, and safe passage to a non-extradition country. They've given us 72 hours. I scanned the document, noting the sophisticated language and strategic timing. This isn't random. They specifically targeted Ambassador Williams for a reason. President Martinez nodded grimly. She was scheduled to sign the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement tomorrow, expanding our military presence in Romania by 3,000 troops. It would effectively create a permanent forward operating base 30 miles from the Ukrainian border. The pieces clicked together in my mind like a tactical puzzle solving itself. They're not just after the ransom. They want to derail the agreement, send a message that American diplomatic missions aren't safe in Eastern Europe. Classic destabilization strategy. Secretary Hawks pulled up another display. Romanian authorities are willing to cooperate, but they're out of their depth. Local military is competent for conventional operations, but this requires surgical precision. One mistake, and we lose an ambassador. I studied the satellite imagery of the suspected capture site, my mind automatically cataloging terrain features, access routes, and potential complications. What about the security detail? Any survivors? 2 wounded, evacuated to Ramstein Air Base in Germany. They confirmed at least 8 hostiles, military-grade weapons and equipment, coordinated like a professional operation, not street criminals or political amateurs. The president leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving my face. Elena, I need to know if this is recoverable.
The diplomatic implications of losing an ambassador to terrorists would be catastrophic, but a failed rescue attempt could be even worse. Elena, not General Thompson. In moments like these, when the stakes were highest, President Martinez always used my real name. It was his way of reminding both of us that behind the classified identity and strategic expertise, I was still a person making choices that would affect real lives. It's recoverable, I said without hesitation, but not through conventional channels. This requires a team that officially doesn't exist, operating under protocols that officially don't exist, in a country that officially isn't hosting American special operations. Director Reynolds nodded. Your consulting firm. My consulting firm. The polite fiction that allowed me to maintain a civilian identity while commanding resources that would make most military commanders envious. Blackwater operations had been my brainchild, staffed with the most elite personnel from every branch of service, all officially retired, all carrying security clearances that went deeper than most government officials ever imagined. I can have a team in Romania within 12 hours, I said, but I'll need full diplomatic cover, emergency funding authorization, and real-time intelligence support. Done. The president's response was immediate. What else? I pulled out my encrypted phone, scrolling through contact lists that represented 8 years of building the most sophisticated private military network in the world. Transport. We'll need clean insertion, which means civilian aircraft with diplomatic flight plans, and extraction options that don't depend on Romanian airspace in case things go badly. Secretary Hawks was already making notes. The Pentagon can provide logistical support through NATO channels. What about operational command? I'll lead personally. The room went quiet. President Martinez frowned, the first sign of hesitation I'd seen from him all evening.
Elena, you haven't been in the field for 3 years. This isn't a consulting role. Sir, with respect, this situation requires someone who understands both the tactical and political implications. If this goes wrong, it can't be traced back to official American military action. It has to be a private security operation that happened to succeed. I met his eyes steadily, and I'm the only person in this room who can authorize that level of deniability. The truth was more complicated. I hadn't been in active combat for 3 years because I'd been building something larger, something more strategic. But part of me had never stopped missing the clarity of direct action, the moment when all the planning and analysis crystallized into pure execution. Director Reynolds leaned forward. The new Iron Guard isn't just a terrorist cell. Our intelligence suggests they're connected to a larger network, possibly state-sponsored. If we can capture key personnel during the rescue operation, we might roll up an entire intelligence network, I finished, which is another reason this can't be an official military operation. Private contractors have more flexibility in interrogation protocols. The euphemism hung in the air like smoke. Everyone in the room understood what I meant, and everyone chose not to examine it too closely. This was the gray area where my consulting firm operated, the space between legal and necessary, between official and effective. President Martinez checked his watch. The Romanian president is expecting my call in 30 minutes. What do I tell him? Tell him we're sending a private security team to assist with the investigation. Civilian contractors working with Romanian authorities to locate and recover American personnel. No mention of rescue operations or military action. And if the operation goes public? I allowed myself a small smile. Then, a private American security company, acting on its own initiative and without government authorization, conducted an unauthorized rescue mission that happened to succeed. You can express surprise and concern about private citizens taking such risks while quietly being grateful for the positive outcome. The beauty of the arrangement was its simplicity. Success would be attributed to American ingenuity and private sector efficiency. Failure would be disavowed as rogue civilian action beyond government control. Either way, official American military forces remained untouched by diplomatic fallout. Secretary Hawks was studying satellite imagery on her tablet. General, the terrain around the suspected holding site is challenging. Mountainous, limited access routes, plenty of natural defensive positions. Even with your team's capabilities, this won't be simple. I moved to stand behind her, examining the topographic data. Simple was never the goal. Effective is the goal. I pointed to a ridgeline overlooking the target area. Here,
We establish overwatch, confirm target location and hostage status, then coordinate simultaneous strikes on multiple objectives. How many personnel are we talking about? 12 operators plus support staff. Small enough to move quickly, experienced enough to handle contingencies. I was already running through personnel files in my mind, selecting team members based on specialized skills and psychological profiles. I'll want Marcus Chen for electronic warfare, Sarah Martinez for medical support, and David Park for explosives and breaching. The names meant nothing to anyone else in the room, but they represented 8 years of carefully cultivated relationships with the most elite military personnel in the world. Men and women who had followed me through classified operations across 3 continents, who trusted my judgment enough to risk their lives on missions that officially never happened. President Martinez stood, signaling the end of the briefing. Elena, I want you to understand the stakes here. If this fails, if American personnel are captured or killed during an unauthorized operation, the diplomatic consequences could destabilize NATO cooperation for decades. And if we do nothing, every American diplomat becomes a target for groups that think we won't respond. I gathered my materials, already shifting into operational planning mode. Sir, sometimes the risk of action is smaller than the risk of inaction. As the meeting broke up, Director Reynolds approached me quietly. General, there's something else. Intelligence suggests the new Iron Guard has been in contact with domestic groups here in the United States, right-wing militias, anti-government organizations. If this operation succeeds, we might have additional targets to investigate. The implication was clear. This wasn't just about rescuing one ambassador. It was about disrupting an international network that potentially threatened American security on multiple fronts. The kind of operation that justified extraordinary measures. Understood. Any specific connections I should know about? Nothing confirmed yet, but the communication patterns suggest coordination at a level we haven't seen before. Professional, disciplined, well-funded. I nodded, filing the information away for later analysis. Right now, the immediate priority was rescuing Ambassador Williams. The larger investigation could wait until after we had secured American personnel. The helicopter ride back to Andrews Air Force Base gave me time to make the calls that would set everything in motion. Within an hour, 12 of the most dangerous people in the world were receiving encrypted messages that would bring them to a staging area in Germany before dawn. By the time I landed at Andrews, my phone was buzzing with confirmations. Chen was already en route from his consulting job in Singapore. Martinez was finishing a corporate security assessment in Dubai, but could be in Frankfurt within 6 hours. Park was actually in Europe already, conducting anti-terrorism training for a German police unit. The machinery of Blackwater operations moved with the precision of a Swiss watch and the lethality of a guided missile. In 8 years of building this network, we had never failed to complete a mission, never lost a team member, never left an objective unaccomplished. But we had also never operated under quite these circumstances, with quite these stakes, against opponents who might be more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested. As my driver navigated the pre-dawn Washington traffic, I found my thoughts drifting back to the dinner party that felt like it had happened in another lifetime. My family's shocked faces when they realized who I really was. The years of condescension and disappointment that had suddenly been revealed as fundamental misunderstanding. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Elena, it's Marcus, from dinner. Grandmother wants to know if you're all right. We're all very concerned. I stared at the message for a long moment. Concerned? After 8 years of treating me like a cautionary tale, they were suddenly concerned? Because now they knew I was someone who mattered, someone whose actions had consequences beyond their understanding. I typed back a simple response. I'm fine. Working. Working. The understatement of the century. While they were probably lying awake in their expensive bedrooms, trying to reconcile the Elena they thought they knew with General Thompson, I was about to board a military transport to lead a classified rescue mission that could affect international relations for decades. The contrast was almost surreal. 12 hours ago, I had been sitting in their dining room, listening to lectures about the importance of practical skills and real-world achievement. Now I was coordinating with the Pentagon, the CIA, and foreign intelligence services to prevent an international crisis. My phone rang as we pulled through the Andrews security checkpoint. Marcus again.
Elena, we need to talk. The family is. We're trying to understand what happened tonight. There's nothing to understand, I said quietly. This is who I've always been. You just never asked the right questions. But General Thompson, presidential consultations? Elena, we had no idea you were involved in anything like this. Of course they didn't, because they had never bothered to learn who I had become after leaving home. They had created a story about my military service based on their own prejudices and assumptions, then spent 8 years treating that fictional version of me as reality. I have to go, Marcus. I'm working. Elena, wait. Grandmother wants to invite you to lunch next week. She wants to talk about everything. I almost laughed. Lunch? As if 8 years of exile could be resolved over finger sandwiches and apologies. As if the fundamental disconnect between their world and mine could be bridged with a polite family meeting. I'll be out of the country for the foreseeable future, I said. Tell grandmother I appreciate the invitation. I hung up and turned off the phone. General Thompson didn't have time for family drama. She had work to do. The cargo bay of the C-130 transport was configured for rapid deployment, with seating for personnel and storage for equipment that officially didn't exist. As we lifted off from Andrews, I reviewed the mission files one final time, memorizing details that could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. Ambassador Williams was 53 years old, career diplomat with experience in conflict zones, physically fit, no known medical conditions that would complicate a rescue operation. Her security detail had consisted of 4 personnel, 2 now hospitalized, 2 missing and presumed captured along with the ambassador. The new Iron Guard had chosen their target well. Williams wasn't just any diplomat. She was the architect of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, the person whose signature would formalize America's expanded military presence in Romania. Capturing her wasn't just about ransom money. It was about sending a message to every American diplomatic mission in Eastern Europe. The flight to Ramstein would take 8 hours. I used the time to finalize operational details and coordinate with intelligence sources across Europe. By the time we landed in Germany, I would have a complete picture of the tactical situation and a detailed plan for neutralizing the threat. But as the transport climbed toward cruising altitude, I found myself thinking about the look in my grandmother's eyes when she realized who I was. The shock, yes, but also something else. Recognition, maybe? Or respect. For 8 years, she had mourned the granddaughter who had thrown away her potential on military service. Tonight, she had discovered that the potential hadn't been thrown away, just directed toward objectives she couldn't see or understand. The irony wasn't lost on me. While my family was building their empire of influence and connections, I had been building something more powerful, a network of capabilities that could reshape global events when necessary. They wielded money and political pressure. I wielded precision and force multiplication. Both had their place in the world, but only one could rescue an ambassador from terrorist captivity. The transport's communication system crackled to life with an encrypted message from the White House Situation Room. Intelligence update. The Romanian authorities had located the probable holding site through signals intercepts and satellite surveillance, a fortified compound in the Carpathian Mountains, approximately 40 kilometers from the initial ambush site. I reviewed the satellite imagery on my secure tablet, analyzing the compound's defensive positions and access routes. The terrain was challenging, but not impossible. The real question was how many hostiles we were facing and what level of training they possessed. Another message appeared. The 2 surviving security officers from the ambassador's detail were conscious and debriefed. 8 to 10 hostiles, military-grade weapons, coordinated tactics suggesting professional training. The ambush had been precisely planned and executed with minimal collateral damage, suggesting the objective was capture rather than elimination. Professional restraint. That was either good news or bad news, depending on perspective. Good, because it meant the hostages were likely still alive. Bad, because it suggested we were facing opponents who understood strategic objectives and weren't likely to make amateur mistakes. The C-130 droned through the night sky over the Atlantic, carrying me toward a confrontation that would define not just this mission, but possibly my future relationship with the family I'd left behind 8 years ago. They now knew I was General Thompson, but they had no idea what that really meant. Soon enough, they would understand that their black sheep granddaughter hadn't just found her way on the world. She had become one of the most dangerous people in it. And right now, that danger was exactly what American interests required. The compound materialized through my night vision scope like a fortress carved into the mountainside.
3 buildings arranged in a defensive triangle, connected by covered walkways and surrounded by a 10-foot concrete barrier topped with razor wire. Motion sensors at regular intervals, guard towers at 2 corners, and enough defensive positions to hold off a small army. I adjusted my position on the ridge overlooking the target, feeling the familiar weight of tactical gear and the cold bite of Romanian mountain air at 4,000 feet elevation. 48 hours had passed since I'd walked out of my family's dinner party. Now I lay prone on a rocky outcrop, coordinating the final phase of an operation that would either rescue Ambassador Williams or create an international incident that could destabilize NATO. Overwatch 1. Report. 2 tangos on the North Tower, 1 roving patrol, heat signatures consistent with 8 to 10 personnel inside the main structure. Came the voice of Sarah Martinez, positioned 300 meters to my east with a Barrett M82 rifle that could put a bullet through an engine block at a mile. Overwatch 2. Status. David Park's voice crackled through my earpiece from his position covering the rear exit. Charges set on the generator building and communications array, ready to cut power and communications on your signal. I swept my scope across the compound one final time, memorizing every detail that could matter in the next 30 minutes. Intelligence suggested Ambassador Williams and the 2 missing security officers were being held in the central building, probably in the basement level that appeared on thermal imaging as a cool void beneath the structure's heat signature. Control, this is Archangel. I spoke into the encrypted satellite communication unit. Beginning final approach. Maintain radio silence until completion or emergency extraction required. The voice from the White House Situation Room was calm but tense. Archangel, understood. Guardian Angel is standing by. Guardian Angel being the euphemism for a B-2 stealth bomber loaded with precision munitions circling at 40,000 feet as an emergency backup option that everyone hoped we wouldn't need. I began my descent toward the compound, moving through the darkness with the fluid precision of 2 decades in special operations. Behind me, Marcus Chen and his electronic warfare equipment were jamming local communications while monitoring Romanian military and police frequencies. If this went wrong, we needed advance warning before official forces arrived to complicate the situation. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: simultaneous strikes on multiple objectives, overwhelming the defenders before they could harm the hostages. Park would cut power and destroy communications, eliminating the terrorists' ability to coordinate or call for reinforcements. Martinez would neutralize external guards from her overwatch position. I would breach the main building with the assault team, locate the hostages, and extract them through a route cleared by coordinated precision fire. But plans, as I'd learned through countless operations, lasted only until first contact with the enemy. After that, everything depended on training, experience, and the ability to adapt faster than your opponents. I reached the compound's outer perimeter at exactly 0347 hours, local time. The concrete barrier was designed to stop vehicle attacks, not infiltration by personnel trained in urban warfare. I attached a small shaped charge to the base of the wall, stepped back, and triggered the detonation. The explosion was muffled but effective, creating a gap just large enough for rapid personnel movement.
Simultaneously, Park's charges destroyed the generator building, plunging the compound into darkness while eliminating their ability to communicate with outside contacts. Execute, 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 I whispered into my microphone. The night erupted into controlled chaos. Martinez's rifle began speaking with measured precision, each shot eliminating a guard before they could raise an alarm. My assault team of 4 operators moved through the breach like a surgical instrument, clearing the courtyard and approaching the main building with overlapping fields of fire. The front door was reinforced steel, designed to stop anything short of artillery. But David Park's specialty was making doors that weren't supposed to open. The breaching charge he'd positioned earlier turned the barrier into flying shrapnel, and my team flowed through the opening like water finding its natural course. The interior was a maze of narrow corridors and defensive positions, designed by someone who understood urban combat. But it was also predictable, following patterns I'd seen in training facilities from Fort Bragg to the mountains of Afghanistan. The terrorists had built their fortress according to doctrine, which meant I knew how to dismantle it. First floor secure, reported Team Leader Johnson, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. Moving to basement level. I followed close behind, my weapon tracking through practiced arcs as we cleared each room methodically. The thermal imaging had been accurate, 8 hostiles plus the 3 American prisoners somewhere in the lower level. But the heat signatures told only part of the story. The basement corridor stretched ahead of us like a throat waiting to swallow unwary intruders. Motion sensors blinked red in the darkness, and I could see the subtle bulges in the walls where shaped charges had been positioned to collapse the tunnel if the compound was breached. Professional paranoia. These weren't amateur terrorists driven by ideology. They were professionals who understood that their value lay not in dying gloriously for their cause, but in completing their mission and living to fight another day. "Shaped charges on the tunnel supports," I whispered to Johnson. "They're prepared to bury us down here." He nodded, already adjusting the team's formation to account for the trap. Instead of advancing directly through the corridor, we would breach through the floor above, rappelling down into the holding area from an unexpected angle. Park's voice crackled through my earpiece. "Archangel, be advised, thermal imaging shows 3 stationary heat signatures in the northeast corner of the basement, consistent with restrained personnel. The hostages, Ambassador Williams and the 2 security officers, exactly where intelligence had predicted they would be. But between my team and the prisoners were 6 armed terrorists who had chosen their defensive positions with professional skill. I made the tactical decision that would define the next 5 minutes. Instead of attempting a conventional rescue that would give the terrorists time to harm the hostages, we would breach simultaneously from multiple directions, overwhelming their ability to respond in a coordinated manner. "Martinez, can you get an angle on the basement windows?" "Negative, Archangel. No exterior windows on the lower level, but I can put suppressing fire through the first floor windows to keep them focused upward." "Do it. Johnson, prep for vertical breach. We're going through the floor." The next 3 minutes passed in controlled violence that would haunt news cycles for weeks if anyone ever learned the details. Martinez's rifle began hammering the first floor windows, forcing the terrorists to divide their attention between multiple threats. Park's demolition charges created a perfectly sized hole in the floor above the holding area. My assault team rappelled down into chaos and confusion, engaging targets before they could harm the prisoners. The firefight lasted exactly 97 seconds, measured by the timestamp on my helmet camera. When the shooting stopped, 6 terrorists were dead, 3 American hostages were alive and conscious, and my team had suffered only minor injuries from flying debris. Ambassador Williams looked up at me from the corner where she'd been restrained, her diplomatic composure intact despite 3 days of captivity. "I assume you're here officially?" I cut her restraints with tactical efficiency. "Ma'am, we're private contractors working with Romanian authorities. We need to move quickly before reinforcements arrive." She understood immediately. Private contractors meant deniability. No official American military involvement, no diplomatic complications, no messy explanations about sovereignty violations or unauthorized operations. The security officers? Alive, ambulatory, ready for extraction. I helped her to her feet, noting that she moved without apparent injury. "Ma'am, we have transport standing by, but the next few minutes are going to be intense." The extraction route led through the same breach we'd used for entry, but now we were moving 3 civilians through hostile territory while potentially facing reinforcement from local authorities or additional terrorist cells. Everything had to happen fast, clean, and without complications that would expose the operation to public scrutiny. Martinez's voice in my earpiece. "Archangel, 2 vehicles approaching from the east, Romanian military markings but irregular movement patterns, could be hostiles in captured equipment. Time to intercept? 4 minutes to compound perimeter. 4 minutes to get 3 civilians and 4 operators out of a fortified position and to our extraction point half a mile away. Challenging, but manageable, assuming no additional complications." Which was when the complications began. My satellite communication unit crackled with an encrypted message from control. "Archangel, be advised, Romanian authorities are reporting unauthorized military activity in your operational area. They're dispatching a helicopter with armed response team to investigate." Romanian authorities, either legitimately responding to reports of explosions and gunfire, or compromised by terrorist sympathizers who wanted to complicate our extraction. Either way, we were about to have company that could turn a successful rescue into an international incident. Control, estimated time to Romanian response. Helicopter airborne, 8 minutes to your location. Ground forces 15 minutes behind. 8 minutes. Enough time to reach our extraction point if everything went perfectly. Not enough margin for error if we encountered resistance or if the civilians couldn't maintain the necessary pace through mountain terrain. I made another command decision. "Guardian Angel, this is Archangel. Request immediate air support for extraction corridor. Non-lethal suppression only. Repeat, non-lethal suppression." The B-2 bomber 40,000 feet above us could lay down a pattern of precision munitions that would block pursuit routes without causing casualties. Officially, it would be attributed to unexplained explosions, possibly caused by the terrorists' own munitions during the firefight. Archangel, Guardian Angel confirms. Suppression pattern will commence in 60 seconds. Recommend you be clear of the compound by that time. I helped Ambassador Williams through the breach in the outer wall, noting that she moved with the determined competence of someone who understood that survival depended on following instructions without question. The 2 security officers were wounded but mobile, supported by my team members as we began the half-mile trek to the extraction point. Behind us, the compound erupted in a series of precision explosions that would block access roads and eliminate evidence of our presence. The B-2's munitions were designed to look like secondary explosions from terrorist ammunition stocks, creating a plausible cover story for the destruction. The extraction point was a clearing large enough for helicopter landing, positioned to provide multiple exit routes in case of pursuit. As we approached, I could hear the distinctive sound of rotor blades cutting through mountain air, right on schedule. But the helicopter settling into the clearing wasn't the civilian transport I'd been expecting. It was a Romanian military gunship, armed and obviously searching for the source of the explosions we'd just heard. My team instantly shifted into defensive positions, weapons trained on the aircraft while I calculated options that were rapidly becoming limited. Ambassador Williams stepped forward, straightening her torn diplomatic attire with professional dignity. General Thompson, I believe this is my area of expertise. I watched her walk toward the Romanian helicopter with the calm authority of someone who had spent 30 years diffusing international crises through personal diplomacy. She approached the aircraft with empty hands visible, her posture radiating confidence rather than surrender. The helicopter crew chief emerged with his weapon lowered but ready, scanning the tree line for threats. Ambassador Williams began speaking in what I recognized as fluent Romanian, her voice carrying easily over the engine noise. I couldn't understand the conversation, but I could read body language. The tension in the crew chief's shoulders gradually relaxed. His weapon shifted to a less aggressive position. After several minutes of animated discussion, he nodded respectfully and spoke into his radio. Williams returned to our position with a slight smile.
I've explained that we're survivors of a terrorist attack, rescued by Romanian special forces who are maintaining operational security. They're offering to transport us to Bucharest for medical evaluation and debriefing. Brilliant. Instead of fighting our way out past Romanian military, we would be escorted by them as rescued diplomats. The crew would report that they had located survivors and transported them to safety, without any mention of American special operations or private military contractors. The flight to Bucharest passed in professional silence, Romanian crew members treating us with the courtesy due to survivors of terrorist violence. Ambassador Williams used the time to brief me quietly on the intelligence she'd gathered during her captivity. "The new Iron Guard is more sophisticated than our intelligence suggested," she whispered. "Professional training, modern equipment, and financial backing from sources that aren't motivated by ideology. State sponsors? Possibly, but more likely private interests with geopolitical objectives. They knew about the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement before it was announced publicly. Someone with access to classified State Department communications fed them operational details." The implication was sobering. We hadn't just rescued an ambassador from terrorist captivity, we'd uncovered evidence of a security breach that could compromise American diplomatic operations across Europe. The helicopter landed at Romanian military headquarters in Bucharest just as dawn was breaking over the Carpathian Mountains. I watched the sun rise through the aircraft's windows, thinking about the 12 hours that had transformed me from disappointed family member to operational commander responsible for preventing an international crisis. My encrypted phone buzzed with a message from control. "Archangel, operation assessed as complete success. All objectives achieved, no diplomatic complications, plausible deniability maintained. Well done." But the message that followed was more interesting. Romanian president requesting personal meeting with operational commander. Diplomatic protocol suggests compliance would be beneficial to ongoing cooperation. The Romanian president, who apparently knew enough about the night's events to request a meeting with the person responsible for rescuing an American ambassador on Romanian soil without official authorization or diplomatic coordination.
3 hours later, I found myself in an ornate government office in downtown Bucharest, sitting across from President Antonescu while morning sunlight streamed through bulletproof windows. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with the bearing of someone who had climbed to power through competence rather than connections. "General Thompson," he began, in accented but precise English, "Romania owes you a debt of gratitude for last night's successful operation." I maintained diplomatic neutrality. "Sir, I'm not sure what operation you're referring to. We were civilians rescued by Romanian special forces after a terrorist attack." He smiled, the expression of someone who appreciated professional courtesy even while cutting through diplomatic fiction. "Of course, Romanian special forces conducted a brilliant rescue operation with no foreign involvement whatsoever." He leaned forward. "However, those same Romanian special forces would be very interested in expanding their training cooperation with certain American consulting firms." The offer was subtle but unmistakable. Romania wanted to formalize a relationship with Blackwater operations, providing official cover for future missions while gaining access to American special operations expertise. "That might be possible to arrange," I replied carefully, "assuming appropriate diplomatic channels could be established." "Excellent. I believe such arrangements would be mutually beneficial, particularly given the evolving security situation in Eastern Europe." We discussed details for 30 minutes, laying the groundwork for a partnership that would expand American influence in the region while providing Romania with capabilities they couldn't develop domestically. It was exactly the kind of strategic relationship that made private military consulting more effective than traditional diplomatic approaches. As the meeting concluded, President Antonescu stood and extended his hand. "General, Romania considers you a friend. Should you ever need assistance, you have only to ask." The flight back to Washington gave me time to process the implications of the past 48 hours. What had begun as a rescue mission had evolved into a strategic partnership that could affect American interests in Eastern Europe for decades. Ambassador Williams would sign the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement as scheduled, but now it would be supplemented by classified arrangements that dramatically expanded American operational capabilities. By the time Marine One touched down on the White House lawn, I had written a preliminary after-action report that would never appear in any official government database. The successful rescue would be attributed to Romanian special forces. The intelligence about security breaches would be investigated through channels that officially didn't exist. And General Thompson would return to her civilian consulting role, available for future situations requiring her particular expertise. President Martinez was waiting in the Oval Office when I arrived, looking considerably more rested than during our crisis meeting 2 days earlier. "Elena, outstanding work. Ambassador Williams speaks very highly of your team's professionalism." "Thank you, sir. The Romanian cooperation was essential to mission success." "So I understand. I'm told we may have opportunities for expanded partnership in the region." I briefed him on President Antonescu's proposal, watching his expression shift from satisfied relief to strategic interest. This was how American power actually worked in the modern world, not through massive military deployments, but through carefully cultivated relationships that provided capabilities when and where they were needed. "Elena, I want you to know that your service to this country has been exceptional. Not just this operation, but everything you've accomplished over the past 8 years. You've built something unique, something valuable." I felt a familiar mix of pride and exhaustion, the aftermath of successful operations that most people would never know had happened. "Sir, I serve at the pleasure of the President, and the country is fortunate to have you." He paused, then asked the question I'd been expecting. "I understand your family situation has become complicated." Complicated? The understatement was almost amusing. While I'd been preventing international incidents in Eastern Europe, my family had been dealing with the revelation that their disappointing granddaughter was actually one of the most influential people they'd never heard of. "They're adjusting to new information, sir." My phone had been receiving calls and messages from family members for 2 days, voicemails from cousins who suddenly wanted to understand my work, text messages from aunts expressing concern for my safety, an email from my grandmother requesting a meeting to discuss family matters that had apparently become urgent. But the most interesting communication had come from Marcus, whose tone had shifted from patronizing concern to something approaching professional respect.
Elena, I've been doing some research. Your consulting firm, the government contracts, the international connections. I'm beginning to understand what you've built. The family would like to discuss potential collaboration opportunities. Collaboration opportunities. Translation, now that they knew I had resources and connections they couldn't access through traditional channels, they wanted to find ways to benefit from association with me. The irony was perfect. For 8 years, I had been persona non grata, the family member whose career choices embarrassed their social standing. Now, suddenly, I was a strategic asset worthy of cultivation and partnership. President Martinez seemed to read my thoughts. Family relationships are often more complex than international diplomacy. At least with foreign governments, you know where everyone stands. Yes, sir, though I found that clear communication usually resolves most misunderstandings. I'm sure it does. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. Elena, take some time to rest, but don't go too far. Something tells me we'll be needing your services again soon. The drive back to my apartment in Georgetown gave me the first quiet time I'd had since walking out of my family's dinner party. I thought about Ambassador Williams' composure under pressure, about President Antonescu's strategic vision, about the Romanian helicopter crew who had treated rescued diplomats with professional courtesy. But mostly I thought about the moment when my family had realized who I really was, when 8 years of assumptions had crumbled in the space of a single sentence. General Thompson, is that really you? They now knew I was someone who mattered, someone whose actions had consequences beyond their understanding. But they still didn't know what that actually meant, how many lives had been saved, or strategic objectives achieved through operations they would never hear about. My apartment building's doorman nodded respectfully as I entered the lobby.
Good evening, Miss Blackwood. You have several visitors waiting in the conference room. Visitors? I checked my watch, noting that it was nearly 10 p.m. on a Wednesday, not the usual time for social calls or business meetings. The conference room was a small space off the lobby, designed for residents who needed to conduct business without bringing strangers into their private apartments. Inside, I found my grandmother, my mother, and Marcus, all looking uncomfortable in the institutional furniture, but determined to have this conversation. My grandmother stood as I entered, her posture military straight, despite her 80 years. Elena, thank you for seeing us. Grandmother, I wasn't expecting company. We need to talk. About everything. She gestured to the empty chair across from them. Please. I sat down, noting the careful way they arranged themselves. My grandmother in the center, clearly the spokesperson for whatever they had come to discuss. My mother to her right, looking nervous but supportive. Marcus to her left, with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle that had more pieces than expected. Elena, my grandmother began, we owe you an apology. Several apologies, in fact. The words hung in the air between us, like a bridge I wasn't sure I wanted to cross. For 8 years, I had built a life that didn't depend on their approval or understanding. Now they were offering reconciliation, but on terms that remained to be defined. Go on. My mother leaned forward, her voice softer than I remembered. We misjudged your career, your choices, your achievements. We thought you had thrown away your potential, but clearly we didn't understand what you were building. Marcus cleared his throat. Elena, I've spent the past 2 days making calls, trying to understand what your consulting firm actually does. The people I spoke with, the ones who would even admit to knowing about Blackwater operations, they spoke about you with a level of respect I've rarely encountered. They had been investigating me, using their connections to pierce the veil of classification that surrounded my work, trying to understand who I had become in the 8 years since leaving their world. And what did you discover? My grandmother answered, that you've built something extraordinary, a network of capabilities that spans continents, relationships with heads of state, influence over events that shape international policy. She paused. Elena, you've accomplished more in 8 years than most people achieve in entire careers. The validation felt strange, almost anticlimactic. For so long, I had wanted them to understand who I really was, to recognize that my choices had value and meaning. Now that recognition was being offered, but it came with complications I wasn't sure I wanted to navigate. And now you want to be part of it? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Elena, we want to understand our place in your world. The family has resources, connections, capabilities that might complement what you've built. We'd like to explore possibilities for mutual benefit. There it was, the real reason for their visit, beneath the apologies and expressions of newfound respect. They wanted access to my network, influence over my operations, a share in the power they had just discovered I wielded. My grandmother seemed to sense my hesitation. Elena, family loyalty works both directions. We failed you when we should have supported your choices, but now we want to make that right, to be the family you deserve. I looked at them across the small conference table, these people who had shaped my early life and then rejected the person I had chosen to become. They were offering reconciliation, partnership, inclusion in their world of influence and connections, but they were offering it because I had proven myself worthy by their standards, because I had built something they recognized as valuable and powerful. The love was conditional on my success, just as the rejection had been conditional on their perception of my failure. I appreciate the offer, I said finally, but I need time to consider what that would mean. My mother reached across the table, covering my hand with hers. Elena, sweetheart, we just want you to know that you're welcome home. Whatever you've built, whatever you've accomplished, you're still part of this family. Home. The word carried weight I wasn't prepared to examine. For 8 years, home had been wherever my work took me, whatever mission required my attention. I had built a life without needing their approval or inclusion. But part of me, the part that had sat through their dinner party 2 nights ago and absorbed every petting comment about my wasted potential, wanted to believe they meant it, that the reconciliation was genuine rather than strategic, that the family love was real rather than transactional. My grandmother stood, signaling the end of their visit. Elena, we're staying at the Hay Adams tonight. Would you consider joining us for dinner tomorrow? A proper family dinner, where we can discuss the future rather than dwelling on past misunderstandings. I walked them to the lobby, accepting awkward hugs and promises to think about their offer. As they climbed into their hired car, I felt the complexity of choices that would define my relationship with them going forward. The elevator ride to my apartment gave me time to process what had just happened. They knew who I was now, understood the power and influence I had built in their absence. They wanted to be part of it, to benefit from association with my success. But they still didn't understand the cost of that success, the isolation of living a classified existence, the weight of making decisions that affect lives and international stability. They saw the influence without comprehending the responsibility, the connections without understanding the sacrifice. My apartment was quiet and secure, a sanctuary from both family complications and international crises. I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking out over the lights of Washington, the city where power was measured in access and influence, where my family's connections had always mattered more than individual achievement. Tomorrow, I would decide whether to accept their invitation, whether to begin rebuilding relationships that had been severed by 8 years of mutual misunderstanding. But tonight, I was General Thompson, strategic advisor to presidents, architect of operations that shaped global events, guardian of secrets that ensured American security. And for the first time in 8 years, I was also Elena Blackwood, granddaughter worthy of respect rather than disappointment, family member whose achievements justified inclusion rather than exile. The reconciliation they were offering came with strings attached, expectations and obligations that would complicate my operational freedom. But it also came with something I hadn't realized I still wanted: recognition from the people whose approval had once mattered more than anything else in the world. My secure phone buzzed with an encrypted message from the Romanian president's office, confirming details for our expanded cooperation agreement. My personal phone showed 17 missed calls from family members who suddenly wanted to understand my work and explore collaboration opportunities. 2 different worlds, each offering partnership on their own terms, each requiring choices that would define my future relationships and operational capabilities. I smiled, remembering the moment when the presidential aide had called me General Thompson in front of my family, when 8 years of assumptions had collapsed in the space of a single sentence. They had mocked my military career at dinner, treating my service as a phase to be outgrown, a mistake to be corrected. Now they wanted to be part of something they finally recognized as worthy of their respect. The transformation was complete, from disappointment to strategic asset, from black sheep to family treasure. But the real victory wasn't their changed opinion of my choices. It was the knowledge that I had built something lasting and meaningful, regardless of their approval or understanding. General Thompson existed independently of family validation, served objectives larger than personal vindication. Whether I chose to rebuild those family relationships or maintain my strategic independence, I would do so from a position of strength rather than need, power rather than vulnerability. The dinner party was over. The real work continued. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.